Okay, I suggest we start, since I know that several people are travelling after the conference. Thank you very much to all of you for attending the roundtable. The proceedings will be as follows. So we have 1 hour, and the audience will, of course, be given the opportunity to put questions to the esteemed members of the panel. And for the time being, we've allocated around 10 or 15 minutes towards the end, if that's okay. It's rather propitious that the penultimate speaker discussing the state of translation interpreting studies in China and the emphasis on certain areas, particularly the comparative approach, and the relative lack of recognition of process-oriented approaches. Now, as somebody who works in medieval translation from Greek to Arabic, I would have loved to apply TAPS to some of those people and see so tap them to see what comes out, in a manner of speaking. So I'd like to perhaps start with a very open question, and that is, what do the panel think are the factors that are responsible for the increase in attention for process-oriented approaches? Is there anybody who'd like to start, who has strong views on that?
I think that one of the causes that cognition-oriented studies started to multiply is actually one of the tools that are available. So technology has played a very big role. If you are able to see what eyes look at, if you are able to log keystrokes, if you are able to record all sorts of movements, this is what helps cognitive studies very much, I guess. So technology is definitely one of those factors, yes.
Can I say a little bit more? I think the people's inquiries onto the so-called black box has been there, or the interest on the inquiries, the questions on this black box has always been there in the history. Well, I would say in the history of translation and interpretation. But why such kind of research come into the stage until 1980s? It is because of the methodology. Okay. Up to now, the initial methodology like TAPS start to help people to uncover what people think in their black box, how their minds works on dealing with the kind of tasks. So then with the development of technologies, the data collection method starting from the TAPS, then moving to the keystroke logging, and then moving to the eye tracking, and then moving to the neuroimaging like EEG, ERP, and even to the fMRI, which I'm working on now. I think the development of technology, or the borrowing the data collection methods from psychology or neurosciences, make great contribution to this area. And then the process-oriented studies start to develop and attract more and more interest from this. Okay, so yeah, this is the background about the process-oriented research. And do you have anything more to? Yeah.
Yeah, as Bing had mentioned just now, translation process research using verbal protocols as data collection methods started since the 1980s. And I think one of the impetuses for the interest in translation process research is put forward by Roger T. Bell in his book, Translation and Translating, Theory and Practice. He articulates that it is the process which creates the product, and it is only by understanding the process that we can hope to help ourselves and others to improve their skills as translators. So in other words, in order to better understand the translation process as well as interpreting process, we need to find out what activities are going on in translators' black box while they're translating, and why is the process as it is. I think besides the technological development, one of the other factors is that in translation interpreting studies, we need to conduct experimental and empirical research to yield more objective and unbiased data to describe and analyze the translation and interpreting process. For example, in my research area, translation revision process. So many researchers hold different opinions on, the best way to revise the revision procedures, the best revision procedures in terms of efficiency and quality, better quality. So a Canadian researcher called Brian Mossop and suggested several revision procedures in his book, Editing and Revising for Translators. But at the same time, he admitted that all the suggestions mainly came from his own experiences as translators and revisers, as well as his own understanding of the revision action. So I think it's normal for professional translators and as well as the trainers to say, okay, this is the best way to revise, to translate. But we have empirical evidence that professional translators do not always do what they said they would do or should do. Which means, as professional translators, they are fully aware of the golden rules of how to translate and revise, but putting theory into practice, it's another story. I think with the development of data collection and analysis tools such as eye tracking, yes, EEG, etc., I think it opened a door for us to probe into translators' black box from another perspective. And also, by using eye tracking, we can simply, ask professional translators to do a practical session and then export the video and show this video to students so that students can clearly say, okay, so this is how the professional translators process the source text and target text. And this is the problems that professional translators encounter and what strategies that they use to deal with these problems, and also how they deal with the uncertainties, which is very common in translation and also interpreting and many other things.
Right, so what we've heard is essentially we have technology, which is the main driver, also the types of text, and the use of these tools for enhanced empirical analysis, which of course then brings the point, and I'd like you on this side of the table to perhaps deal with that in addition to responding to what we've heard. Is it in a way a panacea for all the things that people want to know about translation? That is how it is sometimes presented. Will it deliver on that? But so if you could first address the question of the increased interest and spread, and secondly, to what extent you think that it will deliver on what are invariably very grand promises. Professor Schaffner?
Thanks, but I noticed the divide. I think that there is no divide in the sense of saying this is one particular field of translation, here's the other one, and this is no controversy which we are having here. I agree, when you asked the question, also the first thing which came to my mind was the technology. But also, I think we need to see translation studies is still a relatively young discipline compared to some other more established disciplines. And it has developed. And also how we view translation these days, and I mentioned it yesterday in my presentation as well, has also led to opening our minds and looking for interaction with other disciplines. So I think this is also a field where we say, we know translation is not just a pure linguistic activity, but cognitive aspects are involved, social aspects are involved, we interact with other people, which has led to a kind of, and then in connection with the new technology, so kind of re-interest in cognitive aspects. But it's not that all of translation studies now saying we do cognitive-oriented or process studies, because that's what people want to know, because that's where our side of the table comes in. Because also translation, every thinking you are doing, every action you are doing happens in a particular social, historical environment, and you are involved with other people. And that's where I think the two sides, which don't exist in reality, can cooperate, and also by looking at this in embedded and situated action. And I also think, maybe the general public doesn't know that much about what translation is, and just doing process studies and thinking what translators are, where they are looking and how often they hit a particular key is not primarily what interests the general public. I think we need to do also more awareness raising about the effect of translations for cultural development, or aspects we've just heard about, the ethical aspects, professional role of translators and interpreters. And I agree, translation studies has developed significantly when people start to do empirical analysis, like also with product-oriented descriptive translation studies, looking at what do translations actually look like. So what might have motivated a translator to do something, what effect did it have? We need experimental studies as well, I fully agree, but I wonder a little bit, when you say, well, this week we can see what professional translators do, and then we can help to use these insights for training. Also, professional translators, what research has shown, are not a homogeneous group. They're not all of them working exactly the same way, because their training is different, their life stories are different. And sometimes also the experiments may not necessarily lead to unbiased results, because also the setting, the presence of the researcher, you make them wear eye-tracking device, also kind of puts constraints on the results.
Laboratory conditions.
Yeah.
So the mouse should pick up whatever if you want.
Would you like to jump in?
I totally agree with Christina, and I always keep in mind her talk of yesterday. Well, and I don't think that we should necessarily choose between two branches. We should combine them, because in translation studies we need them both. But if I go into specifics and come to my research interests, which primarily concern literary translation, we have some problems, because sociological approach, it's okay. We know what to do, how to do, and why to do this, in order to see what social actors and factors are involved in this literary production. And I know why we should apply this process-oriented approach also, but because I know how it happens with me, I don't know how it happens with others. And this is the problem. I can hardly imagine my colleagues who would accept to put all this on them and to perform literary translation, because literary translation is quite an intimate thing. It's not public, and it's very unpredictable in terms of time, because you can have some pages that translating of them would take you only a couple of hours, but there are some pages, and I have told you, Yeah, that can contain some kind of classic poetry that was not translated into target language, and it will take you, well, a couple of days or a couple of weeks to translate it. And you keep it all in mind all the time, walking in the street, sleeping, going into the shower, you are translating. How we can measure that with the process and the approach, well, I don't know, maybe you have some insights to give me, because I am very interested, well, how could we proceed in this field? Because, well,
nobody would suggest wearing the equipment as you go about your business. We haven't got here somebody who will defend the sociological term to the death.
No, I won't be original here, because I would like also to emphasize that it's really complementary to that is the basis of the interaction of these two branches in translation interpreting studies, because I would compare it, actually, just to give a simple example how it may work from another discipline, physics, right? Or astronomy, right? As again, another branch of astrophysics, let's call it. So for us to understand how stars and big, celestial bodies work, really, we needed to understand nuclear physics, right? So these are two sides of the same medal, so to speak, right? So that's why there is no, God forbid, conflict or rivalry or whatever. These are really two sides of the same token. Yes, well, just to respond to Sergei's idea, actually we are now start to integrate and cooperate. Actually, I always talk with Sergei when we're in our private free chat, and we think actually, as I always put in my talk as well, we are working on process, even the sociological approach. Why I say in this way, I metaphorically say, okay, the process-oriented study is working on what's going on in the black box, which is a very micro observation, like using the microscope to look at what translators do. And this is necessary because the empirical studies did find a lot of things which we can accurately to report or to investigate. And what you do, like Translation Society, is a telescope to look at translation in the social context. Okay, so starting from the decision of choosing some articles or books to translate, how to translate it, how the books get published, what response from editors, from publishing houses, from readers, receptions, and then get back to the translator if you want to make revisions or want to republish it in the second version. So this is the macro process. So what we are looking at is a micro process which might look at just this page to translate in a particular time and what's going on, what happened with behavioral, cognitive, and even the neurobiological things. But what you say, you are forget about this micro facts. But you look at, okay, let's default this kind of process, maybe not to look at it in detail, but I say, why as a translator I choose to translate Molière, translate Hamlet, Shakespeare, then during my translation, what happened? Have I got responses from editors or even the authors? Okay, so this is a kind of integrate between the process-oriented and sociological studies on translation.
Well, that's an avenue that I'd like to explore a little bit, because indeed there is a question about how to integrate, what are the ways in which to integrate these two things. And we've already today, in these past couple of minutes, noticed a few fractures in this very pretty picture, where we've heard that this is obviously a very common response. Well, yes, but it doesn't work with literary translation. Because you can't have people wear something on their heads while they're translating poetry and so on. So that's one thing. The second thing, so how to effectively integrate that. And the second thing, which is related, that I'd like your views on, is necessarily, as scholars, we work in a very compartmentalized fashion, whether we like it or not. And there's a very simple reason. The reason is time. When you pursue a certain avenue, when you're working in a certain subfield, it's impossible, especially with the proliferation of subfields, to cut across and keep up with everything that people are doing, acquire the necessary skills, and so on. Professor Van der Pitt, I can sense you're just dying to get in there.
Well, I wanted to react first on a few things that were said.
Absolutely.
Is that possible
Yes,
also?
please do.
Because you were saying that we can't walk around with something on our heads. I don't think that it will take a long time before we actually can walk around with an eye tracker on our heads and do some kinds of things. Whether it's going to work for translation, that's another matter. But and whether it will work for literary work is yet another matter. But I would like to point out that last year in the Netherlands, there was this novelist, Arno Grunberg, who was actually invited by various companies and neurologists, both in the Netherlands and in the United States, to stay there for 1 month to write his book. And they just recorded the whole process. So, is it possible? Yes. Would every novelist and every literary translator like this? Is another question. But there are possibilities. And perhaps we need to be creative and brainstorm, and we might find small avenues here or there, I think. What I would also like to say is that okay, we have our different fields and we need to collaborate, and there's also more interest for the other disciplines, but it's also the case, and I'm very grateful for this, that some disciplines also are interested in translation. And we need to make use of that as much as possible, and as soon as we feel that there's this common interest, then it's up to us to treat this very carefully and make use of it as much as possible. So the interdisciplinarity, which is actually growing in academia more and more, I think, it's increasing. This is also something to be grateful for, because it helps translation studies developing in all our different ways. But we need to come back very often. We need to produce volumes or collections of data together, so that we keep in touch, because if we focus on our fixations, then we get too much fixated, I guess, on the narrow object. So we need to be pulled back once in a while. And you are flying around, and we need to pull you back down. Once in a while, I guess. I remember the story that Miriam Schlesinger told at one of the ESD conferences about the fox and the mole. The mole is digging and looking for all the facts, and the fox is walking around. So the ESD conference was always talking about foxes and moles, but we need to collaborate with our microscopes and spectroscopes and whatever we have.
So in effect, because we could redefine the terminology in that sense and talk of, rather than talking about multidisciplinarity, where we can imagine distinct, discrete fields, interdisciplinarity with real collaboration. And that's, Jane, if you'd like to come in on that, do you think, in light of what we've just heard, and in light of the skills, and I really do emphasize the fact that there are different skills involved, different sciences even, neurology or at the very least neurolinguistics, Do you think that this, in a way, spells the end of the lone translation scholar? That for this type of research, one necessarily must have a collaborative team that can provide the essential input? Because you have a translator who, if all things being equal, very rarely has the required knowledge in neurology. And conversely, you have neurologists who may not always have the required skills to deal with translation. What is your view, or do you think there is a way in which this Renaissance translation scholar can come into being?
I think, first of all, researchers in translation studies and also in other disciplines, they should collaborate with each other and also learn the new technologies. There is a story called The Blind Man and the Elephant. I think it's a Chinese story. Or? Yeah. So it said that 6 blind men were trying to figure out what the elephant looks like. So the first one touched on its nose and said that, oh, it's like a snake. The second one touched its leg and then said, oh, it's like a like a tree. And we had a third one which touched its ear and then said, oh, it's like a fan. I think obviously we're not blind, but I mean, we are working together to search for the nature of translation from these different perspectives. So I think if we can collaborate and then, the more angles that we have to look at translation and also interpreting, so the more complete our views will be. And I think it's always suggestive for researchers to learn different things, to keep up with the technological development, and because we are all in the 21st century translation industry. So I think, I hope I have answered your question.
Yes, of course, because on the other hand, of course, one has to also make a very clear distinction between using the technological tools and having the skills in order to use them correctly. But I'd like to move to this side, and perhaps if I may start with you. You've told us where you think it wouldn't work. Are there areas in your view where you think a collaborative, integrative approach could work, where you think it might be useful within the sociological analysis of translation?
Well, yeah, of course, it could work. And I think we had enough talks about how it could work and where it could work. And in 2 days we saw this. And also the talks of today, they presented that, there are many areas where it could work, and it works. And I think, speaking about a collaborative approach, it's very fruitful also, because, I just read that, finished yesterday, a Swedish mystery novel where this was quite a good quotation. Well, if you change perspective and if you change a place, you see more and more clearly. Well, if we have a team where many different or several different specialists are involved, we can have many perspectives or more perspectives, and we can see more clearly what is happening in the process of translation. Well, I think maybe it will work also for literary translation one day. I'm very interested in because
No, I don't want to interrupt you. I just want to add something later on.
Could I also add, why should we cooperate? It's not that translation studies is such a wide area. There are so many research questions, research interests we have, and there are some questions which still can be answered by using linguistic text analysis, where you don't need any process studies, where you don't need any sociological things. Also, obviously, I fully agree. So the more perspectives you have, the deeper you can dig, and also you widen your horizon. but one should not necessarily artificially force, say, where you have to combine them. But I think all the method, whatever we are doing, depends on what exactly is my aim, what do I want to find out. And I think there is scope for some question where you say, this is my particular aim, I do purely eye tracking, and that will answer my things. Your other research question where you do the old data and dig out the bones of the translators and then say, well, do some DNA tests and say, what kind of genes did you have? Is something like this, you know? So I think there is so much possibility for doing research using particular methods. Not for everything do we need to have the things. And also, as I was saying yesterday, it's not only process studies and sociological studies. They're not the only methods we have for doing research in translation.
So, but did I understand you correctly when you said that in fact we shouldn't pray to the altar of collaborative research all the time?
But we should. No, it depends on what you want to do.
Yeah,
right.
For
Yes.
certain things,
The buildings.
collaboration by all means and collaboration with other disciplines, but this is determined by the research aims and by the research questions. And you mentioned time. It's also in our climate here with REF and everything else, and student numbers and money. So it puts other kind of constraints where the educational system sometimes kind of forces us or prevents us from. So we encourage cooperation, interdisciplinarity, but then you are sitting in your box and the REF looks at this particular panel, where you struggle also. Then I think it's opening the mind for the importance of translation also for other disciplines. So it's good.
So, but I think we've
Others come
identified
in.
a problem here. I just heard you mention a very crucial term as an obstacle is the students.
The obstacle, so that with university systems, so looking at the income issue, so I need student numbers, and then I can
And they keep you busy.
keep programs running, and I can have the money to do the research. Yeah? So it's not, the students are not an obstacle, whatever. I'm saying it's the system that universities are interested in getting the money, and therefore you get the students, and if you have the students, you can teach.
Perhaps just a quick response, and then I'd like to hear Sergei's view, because you wanted to add something.
Yeah, you were asking about something that we could collaborate on. For instance, there's the topic of retranslation.
Yes.
So why not just look at eye fixations in when somebody is retranslating a passage and see where are the problems and what are the hesitations, and which with the retrospect interview inquire into the motivations and the thoughts, why the translator actually chose certain translation solutions in order to see whether the retranslation hypothesis could be confirmed or not. This is one thing that I would think of. I was also intrigued very much yesterday by Yassid Haroun's interpolation notion, and then I thought, but interpolation, this is, when I am interpolated, this is cognitive phenomenon, right? We could see and try and find what happens here cognitively, this interpolation. It's a cognitive process when you feel interpolated. So, I mean, there are things that you could question, and yeah, the many notions are both cognitive and social. Yeah, we live together and we are individuals, so...
Sergei, would you like to go back to the...
Well, again, because I'm in the cycle, so I would just from end of the sentence again stress what Christina has just said, that really it depends on what is the focus of our particular research project. So if maybe I will throw in some of my dear names here, Luhmann. He's talking about the social
existence as only one aspect of human existence in general. So he talks about our human existence as an intersection of bio, psycho, and social systems, right? And that was one of the controversial issues about the reception of his theories, that he was criticized for excluding people out of his research, while he was actually arguing for a very specific and focused research. So when we are talking about relations between people, we are talking about social systems. When we are talking about individual actors, then we are talking about psychology, and when we are talking about physiological processes, which are also part of our human existence, we are talking about biological systems, and academically we are compartmentalized according to this. Of course, they are artificial to an extent. So we are artificially excluding, biological aspects, or as my PhD supervisor Annie Brisset would say, when we are studying milk, we are not studying cows, right? So, but at the same time, there are types of research when, to understand the composition of milk or whatever, we need to take into consideration cows and maybe grass and whatnot, right? So that really depends on what we are studying. So there are times when we need to be very specific. I'm specializing in, say, social aspects of translation for this particular research, right? But that doesn't mean that there are no projects where we will need to come together and discuss other aspects.
That's so if I may recap, so perhaps our perception of these distinct strands and, made of twain never meet, in fact, that's where already things go wrong, because it really depends on the target. It's object-oriented rather than process-oriented in this particular context, pardon the pun. I'd like to go back and ask you, Bing-Han, in terms of the types of outputs that you feel may be eminently suited for process-oriented approaches, which ones would you be talking about? Would you be thinking about interpreting? What kind of translation? What do you think is an ideal field for process-oriented analysis, so more cognitive analysis?
So you mean compared with the product?
Yes, exactly.
Well, I think we divided translation study into product-oriented, process-oriented, functional-oriented. This is based on the James Holmes DTS, Descriptive Translation Studies. And in the history of translation studies, product-oriented studies, to describe the product, it is quite, if I can say, quite easy because we are so easy to have even the corporates, they are all products. And for process-oriented studies, it is more difficult because it exists in the black box. So I don't want to say which part or which data is more important. Both are important. The issue is the product things has been studied quite often, while process was investigated or developed in a very limited resources. And I also, starting from this point, I want to respond to Professor Schaffner's question: why do we want to interdisciplinary collaborate? Because I want to say, when a discipline developed, becoming more and more, trying to becoming more and more mature, then we were trying to develop something, maybe something new. Okay, for example, the neuroscience of the translation, and this part, according to James Holmes in 1972, in his classic paper, the Niemann-Little Translation Studies, he has witnessed the process study. But in that paper, he argued in a very weak tone, says, okay, the linguistic, this part related with the neuroscience eventually. But we might rely on the neuroscientist, biologist to help us to develop, to uncover this part. This is back to the time, 1972, when James Holmes witnessed the undeveloped, uncovered, unknown side. But back to 2005, I witnessed another paper which was written by Maria Timoshka. And in that paper, she also mentioned about the neuroscience of translation. And she changed slightly. Okay, we should develop she said, okay, the future translation studies must involve neuroscience. This is her word. And in order to study the neuroscience of translation, which the neuroscientist or biologist it is a time for them to look at this area. And then she has another part of the sentence. Our translators also should be sitting in the table together with them to uncover the known, unknown area of translation studies. So that's what I want to argue, the necessity of collaboration. We cannot leave this area to the neuroscientist or biologist to look at ourselves. It is a time, but we translators should also promote and to be working with them, sitting together with them. Then she thinks this area will be discovered maybe much earlier and much better way.
Yeah. I mean, in many ways, of course, it is also an artificial debate because there's room for all, just like in linguistic. There's neurolinguistic, there's all various subfields. Yes, for sure.
Yeah, I just wanted to add, I mean, I didn't say we should not collaborate, I just saying we should not artificially force that for each particular topic. The collaboration needs to be there. But I fully agree. The more we learn about translation, then the new questions emerge, where you then say, okay, how do I find the answer to this one, which leads you to other disciplines and new research methods. And also what you said with translation studies scholars should be at the table where things happen. We see the same development with all the technology, machine translation, for example, where you have the computer science experts developing machine translation systems and not necessarily the translation people. Yeah. So I think that's much more for us also to actively seek the collaboration with other disciplines if we feel that for this particular project, which I want to conduct, I need the input from others or the collaboration.
So not genre-driven, but really object-driven.
Object-driven, research-driven, yeah.
Right. Jin, would you like to add something to the collaborative angle or the need for collaboration in trying to marry the two strands?
Doing the skills that we need for technology and also...
No, at a higher level, simply collaborating at all different levels.
Disciplines.
Yes, but more specifically...
According to your personal research or your experience in doing collaboration.
Yeah, exactly. That would be a good way to... so in your own
Just
research...
finish the research, yes.
Exactly, so that would be a very, very good way to embark on the topic. Yeah.
Okay, then I will talk about my research. So the research topic on my PhD project is the process, the translation, the working patterns of translation revision, including self-revision, other revision, and post-editing. I'm trying to triangulate eye tracking with case row locking, which is Translog 2, and also queue-based retrospection to collect the data. So at the first stage, while I was designing this research, I met a lot of difficulties, obviously, because I didn't have much knowledge about, computer systems, how to write those scripts, programs, and also data analysis methods. I mean, even the simple statistical analysis methods like SPSS or ANOVA, you know, I didn't know much about it. And then I went to Copenhagen Business School, which is very popular for the TPR, Translation Process Research team, where like a group of computer scientists, they collaborated with translation experts, I mean researchers. They work on machine translation and also the translation process. A data collection analysis framework that they designed is called CRITT-TPR database. So in this database, they use natural language processing knowledge to annotate. First of all, they separate the product data from the process data in Translog 2, the raw logging data, which contains both eye tracking data and keystroke logging data. So we have both process and product data. And then they annotated all this data. And then, so we have different types of data. For example, we have different tables which enable us to do statistical analysis. And then we have another tool.
May I interrupt because we're getting short of time. The question was actually whether in your research you had been on the cusp of the sociological, cognitive, and so the two sides, whether there was that combination, whether you'd encountered that in your research.
I don't
So
think
that
it's
the
not necessary to combine it with
No, of course not. But the question was whether it was an element in your research.
In my research, sociology aspects was not included in my research, but with the data, with the development of data analysis methods, which provide us with all those information about at what time. At what specific time this translator is looking at which word, inserting or deleting which word, and we have all this parallel information. In the future, we might collaborate with social aspects to say, okay, at the same time, what is going on in the translation, in the translator's black box, but at the same time, what factors like environmental or social factors influence the decision-making process.
Yes, quite. That's exactly
word. Yeah.
The database includes meta information. So,
exactly.
Yeah.
I'm afraid that if we want to include the audience, we'll have to draw it to a close. But I would like to give one or two people the chance to perhaps make some closing remarks before I hand the floor to the audience.
A quick one. I'd like to get rid of the word turn, because turn...
I second that.
Yeah. Because
Motion
turning means turning away also from, and I really don't like it because it dissociates one group from another group. So this is not collaborative enough to my mind. So
That's linked to the crossroads, which is also something which is problematic.
yeah.
Yeah, but I like the word turn because I think of the word turn as the turn of a river. It's the same river, but we are just turning because
As opposed to a car.
Yeah.
But you're taking a linear path, and I would like to go fly. And
Well, I understand Professor
Geology.
have the questions about our definition of crossroad, because I see in her presentation yesterday, not necessary to be the crossroad of sociological and process-oriented. But why we use this is mainly because again, sociological made process-oriented, and our themes are mainly focused on these two sides. But of course, responsibility, many other roles could be joining into the crossroad. So I do agree with you, but I know you feel this must be sort of uncomfortable.
Well, let's
to
take
you now.
advantage of this point when Minghan agrees with Sergei to start. And in fact,
One more sentence. Why we also using this not only because Sergei and myself, but also because I think Professor Schaffner also noticed the two important conference or panels which Maria has organized, and they are publishing a book in special issue transition space. And in this issue, they want to discover, I put it here, an invisible line in translation studies between cognitive and sociological research. So there do have some links and interface, especially
yes,
interface.
perhaps the word interface is what we
between
should
cognitive
be
and
talking about.
sociological
Yes,
studies.
yes.
So
And I don't think anybody objects to that,
No.
and we can gainsay that. Wonderful, wonderful. Are there any questions, please?
Well, I have just a remark. I think
To whom? Anybody in particular, please?
to all of them. Well, I think that collaboration, of course, is important between these two poles of the translation, sociology and process-oriented. But responding probably to Binhan's drawing on Maria's Timoshko, stressing the need that translation scholars must, or it's a must to engage with neurology studies, then I pretty much side with Professor Christina Schaffner here. We see, of course, the necessity to collaborate or to engage with process-oriented, but this engagement should not be forced. Otherwise, the idea of the research loses its significance. Because what I see is the study that you undertake shapes the methodology of analysis that you should select. It shouldn't be enforced in one way or another. It's a subfield immersion. Of course, it enlightens our understanding
Rather than the other way around.
translation. Absolutely.
Yeah. Any responses?
Well, no, I would say it's a kind of force to have interpret in cooperation and interdisciplinary studies, but there's a kind of necessary. If you're trying to if you're trying to explore something new which is not yet well prepared in this in your own discipline, like translation studies, it's developed in a very recent
I think to say that we're forcing it now, that's inaccurate as well. In that it's been around for a long time. Okay, Holmes started out with identifying process-oriented translation studies, and that developed. But then you've got the interpretive theory in 1884, so Scovich. She looked into the theory side of it, taking the idea away, same as Dr. Liu, with the thought, the language input, the deverbalized thought process, and then the output. So that's already been there, just having empirical research, and it's been called for over the years. Ullman, Garcia, Parody, Timoshko, Dr. Zhang. The idea is there, the want to research it is there. It's just a case of approaching the alternative subjects and disciplines to then combine that into one. There is no forcing it. There is a want already there. It's just a case of doing it.
Anybody else?
Well, do you think it would be correct to say that there is a need for this marriage rule in all cases? Or, which is because I don't think that what the point here is forcing in all cases, but obviously if the research question calls for a combined methodology, then when I think what this side is saying, it goes without saying that it is useful. What they're saying is not to try and always include all perspectives when they might not be relevant or help us, shed more light on the question we're actually addressing. So, I mean, I don't know whether anyone really meant to say that it's forced in all. I mean, the point is not to force it in all cases, but it's not saying that you cannot, combine it. They don't exclude each other, basically. It's two. One.
I just want to make a brief comment and a brief question. I really enjoyed the roundtable discussion. I hope every conference can have that section. And I really learned a lot every time I observed the discussion among accomplished scholars. And my question is about the objectivity and unbiased data from empirical studies and experimental studies. Because in process-oriented studies, we use this, we think it's more scientific methods, and we compare with more statistical tests, etc. But do you think we can really collect or achieve that objectivity in process-oriented studies?
Not 100%, but we are trying our best to collect as objective as possible, as natural as possible, as high ecological validity as possible. And that's the motivation, or that's the drive for our development of different technologies. Because of the short of ecological validity for text, then we start to think about translog. Because translog can only record the typing side of the data. We're trying to borrow the eye tracking to record the eye data. And because this is all belonging to the outside data, then we are thinking about the real black box. So we're trying to neural imaging this black box. So this is, we are trying to move into as objective, as natural as possible. Okay, but not 100%.
Yeah, I would really corroborate this. I support this kind of view. I would also like to add that if as soon as we interpret the data, we just have a view, one point of view, which might be informed from different sides. But it's never going to be informed from all sides because we don't have the time to do that. So as soon as we interpret, then as soon as we make a qualitative analysis, then we're at risk.
Even though we are collecting data from the participants and their approaches of action, and triangulate that interview data with the performance data, which is from the controlled experiment, it very much relies on how we understand and the participant understand their process. So that part is subjective, and we can't push it to be pure objective. And that made me think about who does the research may have impact on the objectivity. For example, translators do process-oriented translation studies, or language experts do these studies. Both of these two groups of people can do these studies, but perhaps because of their experience and background, their collection and interpretation of these data may be very different.
Definitely.
And enriching,
Yeah.
because of the difference.
And that's why in our empirical studies, when we write a paper, we always have the final paragraph, which is a limitation of this research.
And this, of course, also is true for every single field of science. And I think that's the important thing. So I think on this very encouraging note that we're all friends, I'd like to even bring her to Sergey. I'd like to thank the members of the panel and also the audience. Thank you very much.